The Democrats' pathetic attempt to slander Amy Coney Barrett.
Mr. Reagan.
That's a shame that we're not allowed to say that smart women are hot anymore, because let's be honest, the Supreme Court justices are not known for being attractive people. Amy Coney Barrett is shattering glass ceilings for beautiful women everywhere. I mean, when is the hashtag JILF going to start trending? Am I right? Too far? All right, let's get serious. The other day, USA Today printed an article by Ilya Shapiro. This article argues for ending the practice of publicly broadcasting confirmation hearings altogether. Mr. Shapiro makes a compelling case and puts the hearing process into historical context. The article is worth reading, and he's right. These hearings have become a partisan sideshow. The Kavanaugh hearings were particularly pernicious, but the Amy Coney Barrett hearings has illustrated just how absurd they really are. For the most part, Barrett isn't even being asked questions. Much like the William Barr hearing earlier this year, Democrats have turned hearings into platforms from which they try to gain social media fame. After all, this is how Kamala Harris eventually became Joe Biden's VP pick. But just how ridiculous is this Amy Coney Barrett hearing? How absurd is the Democrat opposition to Amy Coney Barrett? Well, it's so ridiculous that the leftist senators currently questioning Amy Coney Barrett, well, they just look like a bunch of holes.
I imagine you were surrounded by a team of folks that helped prepare you for this nomination hearing.
I have
Yes. But let me finish if you don't mind.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
The Democrats would have been better off taking a position in favor of a Barrett confirmation and just moving through the whole process as quickly as possible. That's how awesome Amy Coney Barrett is. Just get past it and move on to other things about which you'll maybe be in a better position to trick the American voter. We'll break all this down in one moment. First, of course, you're going to have to skip ahead because I have to sell you something. A new study found websites shared over 100 trillion pieces of personal data last year. This is data taken from users from various websites, just like the one you're on right now. Your data is then used for advertising purposes. Many see this as a massive breach of privacy. I don't like being spied on by advertisers. This is why I use Virtual Shield. Virtual Shield is the VPN that was built with privacy in mind from the ground up. With just one click, I can start browsing the web anonymously. And I'm able to browse the internet with peace of mind, knowing that I'm protected against my ISP advertisers, corporations, and hackers with malicious intent, all thanks to Virtual Shield. Tons of tech platforms have stopped their COVID-19 relief discounts, but not Virtual Shield. Virtual Shield continues to offer its loyal customers a whopping 50% off all plans for life to help save costs during this unprecedented crisis. If you want to browse the internet anonymously like I do, please visit virtualshield.com/Mr. Reagan or click the link in the description below. Virtual Shield, these are great guys. One of my first ever sponsors, so if you need a VPN, please sign up with them. Now let's break this down. The role of a judge is to interpret the Constitution in order to allow or forbid the actions of the other branches of government, to apply the law. Nothing more, nothing less. Senator Grassley actually said it better than I ever could.
A good judge understands it's not the court's place to rewrite the law as it sees fit. It's not his or her place to let policy, personal, or moral principles dictate an outcome of a case. We are fortunate. Judge Barrett's record clearly reflects this standard.
Perfect. And Amy Coney Barrett confirmed this perception of the role of a Supreme Court judge in her opening statement.
It was the content of Justice Scalia's reasoning that shaped me. His judicial philosophy was straightforward. A judge must apply the law as it is written, not as she wishes it were. Sometimes that approach meant reaching results that he did not like. But as he put it in one of his best-known opinions, that is what it means to say that we have a government of laws and not of men. Courts are not designed to solve every problem or right every wrong in our public life. The policy decisions and value judgments of government must be made by the political branches, elected by and accountable to the people. The public should not expect courts to do so, and courts should not try. In every case, I have carefully considered the arguments presented by the parties. discussed the issues with my colleagues on the court, and done my utmost to reach the result required by the law, whatever my own preferences might be.
But apparently the Democrats disagree about the role of a Supreme Court justice. During these hearings, the Democrats have revealed openly that they want activist judges. Now, I didn't get what the Democrats were doing at first. They were using photos and anecdotes to create an emotional appeal to preserve Obamacare. If you rule that Obamacare is unconstitutional, then this little girl will die. And you know what? Okay, if that's true, if these people will die without Obamacare, then maybe we have to preserve Obamacare in some form or another. I don't believe any of the alarmist rhetoric that they're spewing here. Obviously, this is a ploy. But if it were true, let's say, hypothetically, okay, great. If Obamacare really is the only way to save children all over the country, I guess we'd better preserve it. But we have to preserve it in a way that is constitutional. We have to modify it so that it is constitutional. We have laws in this country for a reason. We can't just dismiss laws whenever we want to because we're too lazy to create policies that actually work with the Constitution. And that is your job. It's the job of Congress to write laws that work with the Constitution, not laws that try to skirt around the Constitution. And if you can't do that, why are you a senator? You're unqualified for the position. Go get another job. You can't just write a law that completely violates the Constitution and then encourage justices to deem it constitutional just because you want them to. You're undermining the integrity of our entire system of government if you do that. And yet, that's exactly what the Democrats did for the past 2 days. And at first, as I said, it didn't make any sense to me. I thought, do these guys not know how the Supreme Court works? Why are they saying this stuff? This is all pointless. But here's the thing. Parts of Obamacare might be unconstitutional. So no matter how much you want to preserve Obamacare, if it's unconstitutional, you cannot preserve it. Sorry, go write a new policy. So then, as I'm watching this insanity, it hit me. I understood what the Democrats really want. They want bad justices. They want corrupt justices because bad, corrupt justices can be used to implement tyrannical dictates to the citizens of our republic, to strip us of all of our freedoms. The Supreme Court will be hearing a case in 2021 about whether or not the individual mandate in Obamacare is constitutional. The individual mandate requires that every American enroll in some sort of health insurance. Now, here's the thing that I hadn't thought about really before today, actually. The individual mandate is critical to leftists. It's critical to them because it's a law that mandates America do something. It's not a restriction like you can't steal. It's not a requirement for some privilege or activity like driving requires a license. No, this is a universal mandate that every citizen must obey to live here. As Americans, we have always striven to keep these kinds of dictates as limited as possible. We don't want the federal government controlling our lives. And yet, the Democrats are desperate to preserve the universal mandate. And the reason for this is power. Democrats would love to initiate all kinds of universal mandates to demand that Americans do exactly what they want all the time. It's the same with pronouns, right? You've got to call a trans woman she, even though it's clearly a man. This sort of thing. They want that power. But that sort of thing is clearly unconstitutional. None of us want the federal government mandating how we speak. And any justice who rules any such mandate as constitutional, well, they're a bad judge. Could you imagine if a Supreme Court justice who clearly believed, who knew that a law was unconstitutional, if they ruled in favor of it anyway? A judge who rules in favor of an unconstitutional law just because they want to, well, that is a bad judge. And that is exactly what the Democrats appear to want. The Democrats don't want Amy Coney Barrett to be a good judge. They want her to be a bad judge, a corrupt judge. They want a judge who will merely do whatever the left wants them to. They want an activist judge. And these senators, they're organized. They're all listening to the top brass of the party. None of them are thinking for themselves. They're all repeating the same points. They're all employing the same tactics. It was surprising, actually, that the leftists did not attack Coney Barrett on her religion. During her previous confirmation hearing, the one which she endured for her federal appeals court appointment in 2017, the attack on her Catholicism, this was really the only topic that they concentrated on the entire time. Now, probably the reason that they didn't go after Barrett's Catholic faith so much this time around is that leading up to this hearing, they've been intensely criticized for this, as well they should have been. So they were a little gun-shy. Nevertheless, the left-wing media have not relented. They have sustained their ruthless attack on Amy Coney Barrett's faith. They have done so severely that this amounts to what can only be described as a religious test for public office. Senator Josh Hawley spoke about this brilliantly on the first day of confirmation hearings.
We've gotten to read a lot about you in the press, and in particular about your religious beliefs. One attack after another in the liberal media, one hit piece after another, many of them echoed by members of this committee, like this one, for instance, Barrett, long active with Insular Christian Group. We've read stories about your Catholic lifestyle, stories about how you raise your children, stories about how you adopted your children, stories about your Catholic doctrinal beliefs, over and over and over questioning whether you have, I guess, the independence to be a judge, a justice on the United States Supreme Court. And it's not just in the newspapers, it's members of this committee, including the Democratic nominee for Vice President of the United States, who has questioned past nominees who have come before this committee about their membership in Catholic fraternal organizations like the Knights of Columbus. And for those watching at home, that's right, you heard me correctly. Senator Harris and others on this committee have repeatedly questioned judicial nominees' fitness for office because of their membership in the Knights of Columbus. The ranking member, when you were last before this committee, Judge, for your initial confirmation hearings, the ranking member referred to your Catholic convictions as dogma, that's a quote, that lives loudly within you, picking up the very terminology of anti-Catholic bigotry current in this country a century ago.
Why is it that so many of us on this side have this very uncomfortable feeling that, you know, dogma and law are two different things? And I think whatever a religion is, it has its own dogma. The law is totally different. And I think in your case, Professor, when you read your speeches, the conclusion one draws is that the dogma lives loudly within you. And that's of concern.
She wasn't alone. Other senators on this committee last time asked you if you were an Orthodox Catholic. One senator said she worried that you would be a Catholic judge if you were confirmed because of your religious beliefs. I guess as opposed to an American judge, as if you can't be both a devout Catholic and a loyal American citizen. And it's not just you, Judge. Other nominees who have come before this committee for years now have been asked by my Democrat colleagues over and over their views on sin, their views on the afterlife, their views about their membership statements of Catholic organizations, about their membership in other Christian organizations, and on and on and on. And let's be clear about what this is. This is an attempt to broach a new frontier, to set up a new standard. Actually, it's an attempt to bring back an old standard that the Constitution of the United States explicitly forbids. I'm talking about a religious test for office. Article 6 of the Constitution of the United States, before we even get to the Bill of Rights, Article 6 of the Constitution of the United States says clearly, and I quote, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States." Now, that was big news in 1787 when it was written, and it's worth remembering why. It's because no country, no republic in the history of the world had ever guaranteed to its citizens the right to freedom of conscience and religious liberty. This was true from 18th century Britain all the way back to ancient Rome. No, in this country, the people of the United States would be free to follow their own religious convictions, free to worship, free to exercise their religion, and people of faith would be welcome in the public sphere. They'd be welcome there. They'd be welcome without having to get the approval of those in power, like those on this committee. They would be welcome to come and to bring their religious beliefs to bear on their lives, on their office, in all that they do, so long, of course, as they were peaceful citizens who followed the law. This freedom of conscience and religious liberty undergirds all of our other rights because it tells the government that it cannot tell us what to think or who we can assemble with or how we can worship or what we can say. And that's why Article 6 is there even before we get to the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment. But this bedrock principle of American liberty is now under attack. That is what is at stake when we read these stories attacking Judge Barrett for her faith. That is what is at stake when my Democratic colleagues repeatedly question Judge Barrett and many other judicial nominees about their religious beliefs, about their religious membership, about their religious practices, about their family beliefs and practices. That is an attempt to bring back the days of the religious test. That is an attempt to bring back the veto power of the powerful over the religious beliefs and sincerely held convictions of the American people. And that is what is at stake in this confirmation hearing. Judge Barrett is a Catholic. We all know that. She's a devout Catholic. We all know that. She and her husband have chosen to raise their family according to their Catholic beliefs in faithful fellowship with other Catholics. We all know that. Heck, 65 million Americans are Catholics, and many millions more are Christians of other persuasions. Are they to be told that they cannot serve in public office, that they are not welcome in the public sphere unless the members of this committee sign off on their religious beliefs? I, for one, do not want to live in such an America, and the Constitution of the United States flatly prohibits it. Now, the Constitution says that people of faith, like Judge Barrett, are welcome in high office, welcome in any office, welcome throughout our public life here in this country. And I would just say to my Democrat colleagues that these years now, this pattern and practice, as we say in the law, this pattern and practice of religious bigotry, because that's what it is. When you tell somebody that they're too Catholic to be on the bench, when you tell them they're going to be a Catholic judge, not an American judge, that's bigotry. The pattern and practice of bigotry from members of this committee must stop. I look forward, Judge Barrett, to getting to the chance to speak with you further about your legal credentials, about your legal views, about your approach to the law and your judicial philosophy. But I hope that one thing that this confirmation process will stand for in the end, I hope when we look back at the confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Barrett, soon I hope to be Justice Amy Barrett, one thing we will say is that was the time, that was the year that the attempt to bring back religious tests for office was finally stopped.
Now, Senator Mazie Hirono, the worst senator of all time, did take the Amy Coney Barrett is too religious tack, albeit indirectly. She didn't actually mention Catholicism specifically, so maybe she was just criticizing her for being a Republican. But either way, the core problem was that Barrett isn't woke.
Not once, but twice, you use the term sexual preference to describe those in the LGBTQ community. And let me make clear, sexual preference is an offensive and outdated term. It is used by anti-LGBTQ activists to suggest that sexual orientation is a choice. It is not. Sexual orientation is a key part of a person's identity. Okay, now firstly, I've never heard this. I've never heard that saying sexual preference is offensive. When did this become a thing? It's probably one of those things that's deemed offensive by just like, the most radical LGBT activists. The ones who tack the Q on to the LGBT and, the ones who declare their preferred pronouns whenever they meet somebody new. My name's Chris. He, she, him, it, that. So apparently Barrett can be criticized for saying sexual preference instead of orientation because gay people don't choose who they find attractive, according to Mazie Hirono. They're all born this way, like the Lady Gaga song tells us. But are they all born this way? Are we sure about that? No, of course not. Many gay people reverse course and go straight. Were they born this way? Some gay men openly admit that their so-called sexual orientation is merely a preference.
So Amy Coney Barrett is not being offensive when she says sexual preference. However, that bright red pantsuit that Hirono is wearing, that is offensive. Instead of shaming Amy Coney Barrett for being unfamiliar with the latest woke vocabulary, maybe you should instead be asking her for fashion advice. #JILF. All of the concerns that the Democrats have about Amy Coney Barrett, and none of them are real, by the way, but they're concerns that the Democrats are putting forward, pretending that they actually have, so they can try to derail her nomination somehow. Anyway, all of these fake concerns, they can be summed up in two ways. One, Amy Coney Barrett cannot be objective because she's a conservative, because Amy Coney Barrett is a devout Catholic, a staunch Republican, and a Trump nominee, and she's politically conservative. Well, she can't possibly adjudicate objectively. This is, of course, ridiculous. Amy Coney Barrett will adjudicate far more objectively than any leftist judge possibly could. I mean, we've seen time after time leftist courts, primarily in the Ninth Circuit, try to legislate from the bench. Conservative courts rarely, if ever, do this. Conservatives tend to be constitutionalists. They're principled. Leftists tend to be activist judges with no principles. So the claim that Amy Coney Barrett cannot possibly be objective because she's a conservative, it's just laughable. But that brings us to their second point, that Amy Coney Barrett, they believe, will be too objective. The entire case against Amy Coney Barrett in day one of the hearings was a bombardment of anecdotes creating an emotional appeal for the preservation of Obamacare. Basically, if you don't preserve Obamacare, whatever the constitutionality of it, if you don't preserve it, you're a monster. So as I said before, they want somebody who is subjective and partial in their adjudication. They just want somebody who is subjective and partial to the left. And so their criticisms are utterly contradictory. Amy Coney Barrett is both too objective and at the same time, she cannot possibly be objective. And I think this bifurcated attack strategy indicates something very profound about leftists in the Senate. They don't actually know how to attack Amy Coney Barrett. Being too objective is not a bad thing, and being a conservative doesn't actually inhibit objectivity. And so the left have taken a scattergun approach. Instead of attacking Amy Coney Barrett on one front, they'll use every tack they can imagine. None of the shots are particularly powerful, but there are so many of them. The idea is that, well, maybe one of these little pellets will cause damage. This is what they've done with Trump, and they seem to think that it works. They've even tried to smear Amy Coney Barrett as a sexual assault assailant.
Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator Hirono.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
Yeah, that was weird. As I said, Hirono, worst senator ever. But as I said before, they're just making themselves look bad.
I have yes.
But let me finish if you don't mind.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And many of the tirades that these Democrats are going on, they're completely unrelated to the hearing. They're completely irrelevant to the issue of Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation. They're clearly putting this woman through hell, and she's coming across better and better with every passing minute. She was especially stunning in this mic drop moment.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Senator Cornyn.
You know, most of us have multiple notebooks and notes and books and things like that in front of us. Can you hold up what you've been referring to in answering our questions? Is there anything on it?
That letterhead that says United States Senate.
That's impressive.
She is fantastic. As far as I'm concerned, Ilya Shapiro is spot on. These hearings should just end now. It's over. Amy Coney Barrett is clearly a perfect nominee. She will be confirmed. Just confirm the woman and let's move on. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just that they know so much. That isn't so. Good night.
There are going to be millions of Democrats that are going to vote with us this time around because they too want that promise kept. It was a promise for less government and less taxes and more freedom for the people.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.